Hello and welcome to Warframe Unabridged. I'm your host Fen, and today we continue our journey through the power kit of Nezha. This build is a bit of a hybrid build, which largely focuses on the exploding teleportation aspects of Blazing Chakram. I call builds that I associate with this aspect of that power the Investor. The first aspect of the power that we need to take into account, though, is the burst healing, and there is a band-aid associated with that healing that you just gotta rip right off, okay? It's flat out unreliable. The power essentially has a laundry list of caveats that make this power a pain in the ass to use. Obstacle 1, the casting speed. Blazing Chakram is extraordinarily slow to cast. Obstacle 2, the travel speed. This power is a fairly low travel speed, barely faster than your aim glide. It is not a clutch teleportation power. Obstacle 3, limited impacts. So you cast the power, and by luck you've hit a squad of enemies. Well, congratulations. Now you get to track down the target, and the target's probably going to be in a squad because that's the only way you're really going to hit anybody with this, with the way it ricochets, and it only ricochets a few times. And rather than burning straight through enemies, it just bounces right off of them. Obstacle 4, the damage is absolutely pathetic. 100 damage. And that's what this power does. 100 damage. But wait, there's more. It's guaranteed to ignite enemies when struck. Well, that's not that great. It's not that great because it's a percentage of the initial damage done, and the initial damage is 100. So you'd think that this would help identify targets as well, since you hit them and they get caught on fire, but since Firewalker tends to set everybody on fire anyway, they just look like the rest of the crowd. The damage itself is only going to truly deal about 450 total to the target struck, unaugmented and unmitigated. Obstacle 5, no really, it has limited impacts. So you've struck someone, okay? And the Chakram, with a mind of its own, flies in any damn direction it decides. The problem here is, unless you're painfully lucky, you will hit someone on the edge of the squad that you're aiming at. So the Chakram will bounce right away from the other enemies and waste your limited bounces hitting random obstacles. Obstacle 6. The healing is pathetic. 225 health is exactly what Nezha has at base once he's reached level 30 anyway. That happens to be what he can heal as well. After the wind-up, after the pitch, after the travel speed, after possibly hitting an enemy with this, and after having to tell the burning enemy apart from all of the other burning enemies, after the craptastic damage, and finally, there's a beacon of health, assuming you kill the target in 10 seconds. With Nezha's fire going everywhere, though, it can be difficult to tell the victims of the trail to victims of the Chakram, and you have 10 seconds to figure it out so that you can activate the burst healing that has less range than several melee weapons. Obstacle 7. You have too much going on. Alright, so in order to make use of this power feature of Blazing Chakram, you are required to teleport while Firewalker is active toward a group of enemies, which will detonate your Firewalker, setting enemies on fire and dealing a hefty 1250 at base. Now, that seems a bit powerful for a 1-2 combination, but honestly it's not, because in order to accomplish this, you spend a base of 50 energy, with God knows how much energy Firewalker is going to drain, and at the end, it's not something that you can do spontaneously. It requires throwing your Chakram toward an enemy after having already activated your Firewalker, up to the point that the power is cast. What's kind of bad about this on top of all of that is that Firewalker ends when the teleport explodes. So if you have teleported into a group, you can't continue to spread your most reliable form of damage over time without taking time to recast, which kind of destroys the point of teleporting into arm's reach of the enemy, if you ask me anyway. Simply put, this power really can be pretty bad, unless you happen to min-max your build, which is pretty much exactly what I will be showing you today. And despite the way powers like these tend to fall short, I still do love these powers, because you just gotta find different ways to make something viable or optimal, and it requires you get out of that box that you think is all about the build, and you make it about the full loadout. And you know what? That could include a specific companion, or companion powers, specific arcanes, or weapons that are complementary towards a build, and for now anyway, a particular focus school. Now going to the build, we equip Power Drift, Blind Rage, Fleeting Expertise, Primed Flow, Primed Continuity, Stretch, Quick Thinking on account of the Primed Flow, Steel Fiber, Streamline, and Growing Power. We have the Ferox as our primary. It's built for crits and speeds so that in the event that we need to take out singular targets, we can deal reliable DPS. My secondary is the AK Stiletto Prime, Axe Stiletto Prime, however you choose to spit the word out. It is modded with a hybrid build so that we could apply a good base DPS as well as apply some status. For melee, I tend to equip a high status weapon. I have a pretty solid build build on my Tonbo that I use, but for this one, I'm gonna go ahead and go with the Dark Split Sword, modded as a great sword with 3 elemental combinations, being Blast, Radiation, and Corrosive. And I have it modded in a way that grants 85% status chance with Condition Overload to add injury to insults. We will also use Taxon, equipped with Coolant Leak and some defensive powers. For arcanes, we use Energize for sustaining our energy, and Strike to help with the melee attack speed. For focus, I use the Matter Eye School for some bonus damage, as it will add IPS damage to all damaging effects. Now the tactique behind this build is to drown enemy choke points in status, beginning with the Ferox. If you see more than 1 or 2 enemies, do not shoot the Ferox, but throw the Ferox, and use it to trap enemies in a choke point with its electric pull ability. From there, I lay on as much status as is possible with the AK Stiletto Prime. I teleport in with the explosion dealing a fire proc to everybody in range. This will often cause a panic as well. Now the electricity at that point will turn off from the Ferox as it returns to your inventory due to the close proximity, but it will tag out with the Taxon with the cold procs keeping them kaput. Once I am close to the enemies, I will then begin spamming my melee attacks. For the conclusion of this tactique, it's kind of a lower tier build, so I don't go with pure status, but if you follow this tactique and you do want to go for pure status, you can wind up with 9 to 11 status procs, giving you a bonus of maybe 540 to 660%, depending on how many status types you have active. Sounds complicated, right? Well, perhaps at first, but so long as you get the rotation down, it's actually pretty simple. For the primary, shoot with the secondary, teleport into melee range, and slash till they dead. It's a squad kill tactic. It's pretty basic. Rotation usually takes up to 8, maybe 10 seconds to fulfill tops, and it's absolutely devastating in terms of its abuse of the Condition Overload mod. On to our next build, Investor 2.0. For this build, we equip Power Drift, Blind Rage, Fleeting Expertise, Stretch, Energy Conversion, Prime Continuity, Intensify, Armored Agility, Streamline, and Growing Power. For this, we keep the Ferox, built for crits and speed. The secondary is the Sancti Castanas, not modded for damage whatsoever, just for status and status duration. Now this is a camping loadout, so for the melee weapon, we intend to funnel enemies into a kill box or a choke point, and it's useful in defenses and for survivals. Now this is not a standard melee build, however, so it's best to go with a weapon with some good secondary effects. Now if you're facing Corpus or Infested, or you decide to take the Investor on a travel mission or a mobile mission or something to that effect, maybe bring a Rift Strike Twin Basilk, unless you plan to play for quite some time, in which case simply stick with what you would bring into any defense with the Investor, or a survival, and just go with the Zenistar, which is what I intend to use for the video for scaling Grineer or corrupted units. And whatever you do, be sure to equip Condition Overload. We will use the Djinn, focusing heavily on Fatal Attraction to slow and disable enemies that make it through the choke point. For arcanes, we will use Energize to sustain the energy still, and we will use Fury because using the Zenistar with its massive area of effect, it is inevitable that you will crit several times, and it'll enhance its own damage. For focus, I use Matter Eye for that bonus damage, as it will add IPS to all damaging effects, including elementals. For the tactique, just like Investor 1.0, this build focuses heavily on choke point tactics, but it's built for better handling scaling enemies. But it does require heavy investment into new loca, as well as having played 300 days in order to use the Zenistar. Find yourself a cozy corner where enemies can't flank you, and let them funnel their way into your choke point. Typically, you're going to want to start by launching your Ferox into the choke point and let the enemies get trapped by its magnetic pull. As soon as enemies approach, launch some Castanas, and once a good amount are trapped, detonate them, and then launch the Zenistar to complete. Periodically teleport to the choke point, causing a Firewalker explosion to clear rabble that may be linked with an ancient. Reactivate Firewalker, return to safety, and in doing so, you'll leave some additional DPS for the choke point. Now with Arcane Fury, again, it's inevitable that Zenistar will gain the additional melee damage, because when you are dealing a wide area of effect that deals damage per second, you absolutely will crit several times, and you will gain Fury to enhance it. This is a sure thing. This is a horse that is guaranteed to win the race. It's taken the steroids to the rump, and it's going to kick ass, and it's going to take names. Using Matter Eye will add slash, impact, and puncture damage, as well as their respective status types, to all attacks, even those that are purely elemental. This is going to permit your Fire Trail, your Explosion, your Kastanas, your Zenistar, all to stagger, weaken, and bleed out your enemies, occasionally being launched into the sunset by compounding impact and blast procs, which will in turn further enhance the Zenistar damage from condition overload. Now, before we get out of here though, I did want to discuss an extensive rework idea that I've been bouncing off the wall. Chief among my ideas is a pretty big one, and I want to make Blazing Chakram his ultimate. Not just his ultimate, but I want to make it an exalted weapon, which scales not only off of melee mods, but thrown melee exclusive mods as well. Such an exalted weapon would be quite a bit of fun to use. It would be different from anything that we have seen before in that it is a thrown weapon, but of course, we don't want another energy sink like Wukong in our arsenal with his 3 friggin' toggle powers. So perhaps energy can be spent in the way that Avara's Artemis bow is used, in that no other weapons can be used or equipped while it's active, but the energy only drains when the weapon is actually made use of. Now, while it's being used, perhaps we could use maybe a base amount of energy when thrown and half the amount of energy when used as a basic melee. A weapon that can strike constantly in this fashion would make short burst healing much more effective than it already is, and we aren't stuck hoping that it doesn't rebound away from the enemy. Now, as for the teleportation feature, I feel that this could be reworked as well, using a system similar to Ash's mate. Simply use the melee attacks as a method of marking enemies, and then toggle the power off to do a series of fiery, explosive teleports over the heads of the enemies you've marked. Fire doesn't scale very well, so I don't think that it would be too overpowered. Now, alternatively, the weapon could still use teleportation in the same fashion by throwing the chakram as we would have thrown a charge attack. When the Blazing Chakram arrives where you desire to teleport to, you cause the chakram to explode as you would the glaive, the Sarada, or the Halakar, at which point you will arrive in a fiery explosion. But that's it for today, Tenno. Now, if you like what I do here, go ahead and like the video. If you particularly enjoy my content, be sure to subscribe for more Warframe content. And if you just can't get enough of my voice, hit the notification button for some instant gratification. But until next time, this is Finn, signing off.